The council chamber stretched across 3 miles of polished stone and metal that gleamed under artificial lights designed to accommodate 467 different species. Ambassador Kyrex stood at his podium with all 4 arms crossed in satisfaction as he watched the voting results appear on the massive display screen. Every single species had voted yes. Every single one had agreed that humanity should be enslaved for the betterment of the galaxy. The humans had only discovered faster than light travel 6 months ago, and the galaxy had been watching them carefully since then. What they saw was a species that seemed soft and weak and emotional. The humans cried over small animals and wrote poetry about feelings and spent enormous resources helping their sick and elderly. They seemed perfect for subjugation. Kyrex had been the one to propose the motion 3 months ago after visiting Earth as part of a diplomatic mission. He had walked through their cities and seen how they lived in relative peace despite having thousands of different cultures and languages. He had watched their children play in parks without fear. He had observed their markets where people traded goods with smiles and friendly conversation. It disgusted him. Such weakness deserved to be controlled by stronger species. The Vordani Empire needed workers for their mining colonies on the Outer Rim, and humans seemed ideal. They were adaptable and intelligent enough to follow complex instructions but clearly not advanced enough to resist properly organized military force. The vote had been unanimous because every species saw an opportunity. The Zathrans wanted human scientists to accelerate their weapons research. The Krell Confederacy wanted human soldiers who could be conditioned to fight in their endless territorial wars. The Hexlith wanted human artists to create entertainment for their wealthy classes. Even the smaller species voted yes because they hoped to gain favor with the larger empires by supporting the decision. Nobody spoke against it. Nobody questioned whether it was right or wrong. They simply saw resources to be claimed and divided among themselves. Council head Threnix raised her crystalline arms to signal for silence, and the chamber quieted immediately. Her species had led the council for 800 years, and her word carried absolute authority across known space. She turned her faceted head toward the human delegation and spoke in the common tongue that all species understood through their translation devices. The human ambassador was a man named Jack Morrison, who stood with 2 other humans at a small podium that looked pathetically tiny compared to the massive platforms assigned to more important species. Jack had gray hair and tired eyes and wore a simple, black suit that seemed plain next to the elaborate, ceremonial garments of other delegates. Threnix announced that the council had voted to place humanity under galactic protection, which was the formal term they used to make slavery sound benevolent and necessary. She explained that humans would be assigned to various species based on their skills and abilities, and that they would be treated fairly according to galactic labor standards. She made it sound like they were doing Earth a favor by absorbing them into the galactic economy. The other delegates nodded and clicked and hummed their approval. Some were already making calculations about how many humans they could claim. The Vordani hoped for at least 2 million workers. The Zathrans wanted 5,000 scientists. The Krell needed 100,000 soldiers immediately. Jack Morrison listened to the entire speech without interrupting, and his face showed no emotion at all. When Threnix finally asked if the human delegation had anything to say before the decision became official galactic law, Jack simply pressed a button on his podium, and a message appeared on every screen in the chamber. It was written in the common tongue and contained only 7 words. The message said, "We refuse and you will regret this." The chamber erupted in sounds that ranged from laughter to outrage to confusion. Kyrex found himself laughing so hard that his respiratory system had trouble keeping up. The idea that humans thought they could refuse a unanimous decision by the Galactic Council was absurd beyond measure. Several other delegates were already discussing how quickly they could mobilize military forces to enforce the decision. The Vordani fleet could reach Earth in 3 weeks. The Zathrans could arrive in 4. The Krell would take 5 weeks, but they would bring overwhelming force. It would be simple and quick, and humanity would learn their place in the galactic order. Threnix called for order and informed Jack Morrison that his refusal was noted but irrelevant. She gave humanity 1 standard galactic month to prepare for integration, which was actually quite generous by Council standards. Many species had been given only days to surrender when the Council made such decisions. She explained that resistance would be met with appropriate force, and that human casualties would be regrettable but acceptable if they chose to fight. The Council wanted humans alive and functional, but they were not essential. There were other species, that could fill similar roles if humans proved too difficult to manage. Jack Morrison stood quietly during this entire speech, and when Threnix finished, he picked up a small device from his podium and held it up for everyone to see. It looked like a simple communication unit, and several delegates wondered why he was showing them such primitive technology. Jack pressed a button on the device and spoke clearly into it using words that the translation systems carried throughout the chamber. He said the phrases Terra Invicta and waited. Nothing happened for several seconds, and then every screen in the chamber went dark. The lights flickered and emergency systems activated. Delegates began shouting questions and demanding explanations. The council's technical staff rushed to restore the systems but found that something had locked them out of their own networks. When the screens finally came back online, they showed something that made the entire chamber fall silent. It was a star map of known space, but it looked different from the standard maps that everyone used. This map showed Earth at the center, and spreading out from it were thousands of small red dots that covered hundreds of systems. Each dot represented a human ship, and there were far more ships than should have been possible. The galaxy had estimated that Earth possessed maybe 50 vessels capable of faster-than-light travel. This map showed 5,000 ships, and they were all moving at once. Jack Morrison spoke again, and his voice carried clearly through the shocked silence. He explained that humanity had discovered faster-than-light travel 60 years ago, not 6 months ago. They had spent 6 decades exploring the galaxy quietly and carefully, while staying hidden from the more aggressive species. They had studied the Council and learned how it operated, and understood that eventually they would be noticed. They had prepared for this day by building a fleet that could protect Earth from any threat. The ships on the map were not merchant vessels or exploration craft. They were warships designed specifically to fight against multiple alien species simultaneously. The delegates stared at the map in disbelief as the red dots began to move toward key military installations and strategic systems throughout the galaxy. The Vordani home system had 200 human ships approaching it. The Zathran Weapons Research Facility had 50 ships converging on its location. The Krell Military Academy was surrounded by 100 vessels. Every species that had voted to enslave humanity now found human warships moving toward their most important assets. Kyrex felt his satisfaction drain away and be replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. It took him several moments to recognize the feeling as fear. He tried to access his empire's military network to warn them, but found that all communications were being blocked by something powerful and sophisticated. Other delegates were having the same problem. They could see the human ships moving, but they could not warn anyone or coordinate any kind of defense. Jack Morrison continued speaking and explained that humanity had one simple message for the Galactic Council. He said that Earth would never bow to slavery, and any species that tried to enforce the Council's decision would face consequences. He said that humans had spent their entire history fighting against tyranny and oppression, and they would not stop now just because the threats came from space instead of from other humans. He said that the Council had made a terrible mistake by assuming that peaceful people were weak people. Threnix finally found her voice and demanded to know what humanity intended to do. Jack Morrison smiled for the first time since entering the chamber, and it was not a friendly expression. He said that every species would soon understand exactly what humanity intended. Then he and the other 2 human delegates walked out of the chamber, while 467 species watched in stunned silence. The first reports of attacks began, arriving within hours, and the Council realized too late that they had not enslaved Earth. They had declared war on the one species in the galaxy that had perfected the art of warfare over thousands of years of brutal history. The age of galactic dominance was ending, and the age of humanity was beginning, whether the galaxy liked it or not. The Vordani war fleet consisted of 800 ships that had conquered 17 different species of the past 2 centuries, and they approached Earth with absolute confidence in their superiority. Admiral Vex commanded the fleet from his flagship, and he spent the journey imagining how the humans would beg for mercy when they saw the overwhelming force arrayed against them. He had participated in 12 military campaigns and never lost a single battle. The humans had been given their month to prepare, and they had spent it in complete silence, which Vex interpreted as terrified acceptance of their fate. His fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Earth's solar system and immediately began scanning for human defenses. What they found was nothing at all. There were no defensive satellites and no weapon platforms and no ships waiting to intercept them. Earth sat undefended with its single moon visible, and its orbital stations broadcasting normal civilian traffic signals. Vex felt a mixture of disappointment and satisfaction. The humans had clearly given up without a fight, which was smart but also boring. He had hoped for at least some token resistance to make the victory feel earned. He ordered his fleet to advance toward Earth at standard approach speed while his communication officers prepared the surrender terms that would be transmitted to the human government. The first indication that something was wrong came when the fleet reached Mars orbit and every single ship simultaneously lost all power to their weapon systems. Engineering crews across 800 vessels scrambled to diagnose the problem, but found nothing physically wrong with any of the equipment. The weapons simply would not activate no matter what commands were input. Vex ordered a full stop while his technical experts tried to resolve the issue, and that was when the human ships appeared. They did not drop out of faster-than-light travel or decloak from stealth systems or emerge from behind planets. They simply materialized in perfect formation surrounding the entire Vordani fleet as if they had been there all along, but only now chose to become visible. There were 2,000 human vessels and each one was half the size of a standard Vordani warship, but something about them radiated menace. They were dark gray and smooth with no visible weapon ports or engine exhausts, and they moved with an eerie coordinated precision that made them look like a school of predatory fish. A communication came through on all Vordani channels simultaneously, and a human woman appeared on every screen throughout the fleet. She wore a dark blue uniform with silver insignia, and her expression showed no emotion whatsoever. She identified herself as Captain Lisa Brady of the Earth Defense Ship Retribution, and she informed Admiral Vex that his fleet was now completely disabled. She explained that human ships had been shadowing the Vordani fleet since it left their home system, and had been waiting for the right moment to neutralize their weapons. She said that every Vordani ship was now running on emergency power only, and any attempt to reactivate weapons or faster than light drives would result in total system failure. Vex tried to respond with threats but found that his communication system would only transmit to other Vordani ships and not to the human vessels. He watched helplessly as the human fleet began to move in a pattern that herded his ships into a tighter and tighter formation. Several of his captains attempted to break away, but their navigation systems refused to respond to manual input. The ships that tried to activate weapons as a desperate gesture found their entire power grid shutting down, leaving them drifting in space with only life support functioning. Within 20 minutes, the entire Vordani War fleet was clustered together in a helpless formation while 2,000 human ships surrounded them in perfectly spaced intervals. Captain Brady appeared on the screens again and explained what would happen next. She said that every Vordani ship would be escorted back to their home system by human vessels, and that the fleet would be disbanded permanently. She said that the Vordani Empire would reduce its military to 20% of current strength, and would pay reparations to Earth for the attempted invasion. She said that human observers would be stationed throughout Vordani space to ensure compliance, and that any resistance would be met with immediate and overwhelming force. Then she said something that made Vex feel sick to his core. She said that the Vordani fleet was lucky because they would be allowed to return home alive. Other species that had voted to enslave humanity would not be so fortunate. The journey back to the Vordani home system took 3 weeks, and during that entire time the human ships maintained perfect formation around the disabled fleet. The Vordani crews tried everything to regain control of their systems, but it was useless. Whatever technology the humans had used to disable their weapons had integrated so deeply into their computer networks that removing it would require completely rebuilding every ship from scratch. When they finally arrived at their home system, they found 50 human warships already in orbit around their planet. Vex realized with horror that these ships must have traveled ahead using faster engines than anything the Vordani possessed. The Vordani government had no choice but to accept Earth's terms, and within days they began the process of dismantling 3/4 of their military. Shipyards that had built warships for 2 centuries were converted to civilian production. Military academies were closed. Weapon research facilities were shut down. The empire that had conquered 17 species and terrorized dozens more was reduced to a shadow of its former power in a matter of weeks. Human observers arrived in groups of 10 or 20, and took up positions throughout Verdani space. They were polite but firm, and they made it clear that any violation of the peace terms would result in immediate military action. Meanwhile, the Zathran collective was experiencing its own encounter with human military capability. The Zathrans had sent their fleet of 600 ships to claim the human scientists they believed would accelerate their weapons development program. Their approach was more cautious than the Vordani, because they had received word of what happened to Vex's fleet. They dropped out of faster-than-light travel 2 light-years from Earth and sent scout ships ahead to assess the situation. The scouts never reported back. The Zathrans waited for 3 days and then sent more scouts. Those also vanished without any distress signals or sensor readings. Admiral Krath decided to advance with the full fleet in a defensive formation designed to protect against ambush from any direction. They traveled at sub-light speed with all sensors running at maximum power and all weapons ready to fire at the first sign of threat. They detected nothing unusual until they were 1 light-year from Earth, and then every ship in the fleet simultaneously experienced the same phenomenon. Their sensors showed that they were surrounded by a sphere of metallic objects that had not been there a moment before. The objects were small and moved in complex patterns, and there were millions of them. Krath ordered his ships to open fire, and the fleet launched every weapon they had at the swarm of objects. The missiles and energy beams seemed to hit their targets, but the objects simply absorbed the impacts without any damage. Then the objects began to move toward the Zathran ships, and when they made contact with the hulls, they began to burrow inside. Engineering teams watched in horror as the small machines cut through their armor like it was soft clay and disappeared into the ship's internal systems. Within minutes, every vessel in the fleet was reporting catastrophic system failures across all departments. A human voice came through the communication system, and a man who identified himself as Commander Ryan Foster explained what was happening. He said that the Zathran fleet had just been infected with several million autonomous machines that were currently taking apart their ships from the inside out. He said that the crews had approximately 30 minutes to evacuate to their escape pods before the ships would be completely non-functional. He said that Earth would collect the crews and return them to their home system, but the ships themselves would be left as debris fields to serve as a warning to other species. Krath had no choice but to order a fleet-wide evacuation, and 600 Zathran warships were abandoned in deep space as their crews fled in small pods. The human ships that appeared to collect them were enormous compared to anything the Zathrans had built, and each one could hold the entire crew of 10 Zathran vessels. The rescued crews were treated well enough with food and medical care provided, but they were kept under constant guard. The journey to the Zathran home system took 2 weeks, and when they arrived, they found their government already negotiating surrender terms with human diplomats. The Krell Confederacy watched these events unfold with growing alarm and held an emergency military council to decide how to respond. They had voted to enslave humanity because they wanted soldiers for their wars, but now they realized that humans were far more dangerous than anyone had suspected. The Krell military commander was a veteran named Thorax, who had won hundreds of battles through superior tactics and overwhelming aggression. He argued that the Krell should strike Earth immediately with everything they had, before the humans could disable more fleets. He believed that the Vordani and Zathrans had failed because they underestimated human technology, but that a truly massive assault would overwhelm any defense. The Krell assembled a fleet of 1,000 ships, which represented 60% of their total military strength. Thorax commanded from the flagship and planned an attack that would hit Earth from 6 different directions simultaneously to divide the human defense. The fleet split into 6 groups and approached Earth's solar system using different routes through space. They maintained communication silence and used every stealth technology the Krell possessed to avoid detection. Thorax was confident that the humans would not see them coming until it was too late. The attack began with all 6 fleet groups dropping out of faster-than-light travel. At the edge of the solar system in perfect synchronization, they immediately began their approach runs toward Earth with weapons charged and targeting systems locked. For approximately 40 seconds, everything went according to plan. Then every single Krell ship found itself unable to move in any direction. Their engines were running at full power, but the ships remained completely stationary as if they had been locked in place by some invisible force. Thorax ordered emergency maneuvers and power surges and every other tactic he could think of, but nothing worked. A communication appeared on every Krell screen, and a human man wearing a simple uniform spoke with a voice that carried absolute authority. He said that the Krell Confederacy had just made the worst mistake in their history, and that they would now face consequences appropriate to their actions. He said his name was Colonel Jake Morrison, and that he had been waiting for the Krell to do exactly what they had just done. Then the human warships appeared, and the Krell realized they were looking at their own extinction. Colonel Jake Morrison watched the Krell fleet hanging motionless in space like insects trapped in amber and felt no satisfaction from the sight because this was not a victory worth celebrating. The Krell had brought 1,000 ships to destroy Earth, and they had walked into a trap so obvious that Jake almost felt embarrassed for them. Human scientists had developed gravitational field generators 3 years ago, and had been waiting for the right moment to demonstrate their effectiveness. The generators created pockets of altered space-time that could lock objects in place regardless of their mass or velocity. Every Krell ship was now sitting inside its own gravitational prison and would remain there until the humans decided to release them. Jake opened a channel to Admiral Thorix and watched the Krell commander's face cycle through several shades of color that indicated confusion and rage and finally fear. Thorix demanded to know what technology the humans were using, and Jake explained in simple terms that Earth had mastered gravitational manipulation while the Krell were still using primitive fusion drives. He said that the Krell Confederacy had existed for 800 years and had conquered 42 species but had never bothered to advance beyond basic military technology because brute force had always been sufficient. He said that humanity had spent 60 years preparing for this exact scenario and had developed weapons that made conventional military leader obsolete. Thorix tried to negotiate and offered to withdraw his fleet and return to Krell space if the humans would release them. Jake shook his head and explained that negotiation was no longer possible. He said that the Krell had voted to enslave humanity, and then launched an attack with 60% of their military strength, which demonstrated both malice and stupidity. He said that Earth would not destroy the Krell fleet because mass killing was not how humans operated, but the ships would be dismantled piece by piece, and the crews would be returned home to explain what happened. He said that the remaining 40% of Krell military Li Liang would be given one chance to surrender, peacefully or face the same fate. The human ships moved in and began the process of systematically disassembling the Krell vessels using tools that could separate molecular bonds without creating explosions or releasing radiation. The Krell crews watched helplessly as their warships were taken apart around them, and the component materials were sorted into storage containers. The process took 6 days, and by the end, there were 1,000 empty crew compartments floating in space surrounded by neatly organized piles of metal and equipment. Human transport ships collected the Krell crews and began the journey back to their home system while other human vessels stayed behind to process the salvaged materials back. On Earth, the government was dealing with a flood of communication requests from species across the galaxy who suddenly wanted to establish diplomatic relations with humanity. Ambassador Jack Morrison sat in his office in Geneva and reviewed the messages with his assistant Kelly Rogers, who had been organizing them by priority. Most of the messages came from species that had voted to enslave Earth just weeks ago and were now desperately trying to avoid the same fate as the Vordani or Zathrans or Krell. Jack found their panic amusing but also pathetic because these same species had laughed when Earth refused to accept enslavement. Kelly pulled up a message from the Hexlith Commonwealth who had voted yes on enslavement because they wanted human artists to create entertainment for their wealthy classes. Their ambassador was now offering full reparations and promising to fund human art programs and suggesting cultural exchange programs. Jack noted that the message made no mention of apology or acknowledgement of wrongdoing. He marked it as low priority and moved to the next message. The Draxian hegemony was offering trade agreements and technology sharing in exchange for peace. The Solith Unity was promising to vote in favor of any human proposals at future council meetings. The Kilix Federation was offering their territory as a buffer zone between Earth and hostile species. Jack found it interesting how quickly self-interest replaced principles when species faced actual consequences for their actions. He dictated responses to Kelly that acknowledged receipt of the messages, but made no commitments to anything. He wanted these species to spend time worrying about whether Earth would accept their offers, or send fleets to their systems. Fear was a useful diplomatic tool when dealing with former enemies, and Jack intended to use it effectively. Meanwhile, Captain Lisa Brady was conducting a different kind of diplomatic mission in the Vordani home system. She had been assigned to oversee the military reduction and ensure compliance with Earth's terms. The Vordani government was cooperating fully, but Lisa could see the resentment in their eyes every time they had to report another shipyard closure or weapon facility decommission. She met daily with Vordani officials in a conference room that overlooked their capital city and reviewed progress reports while they tried very hard not to show how much they hated the situation. During one meeting, a Vordani minister named Kelrix asked Lisa why Earth was being so harsh in its terms when humanity claimed to value peace and compassion. Lisa set down her datapad and looked at Kelrix with an expression that made the minister uncomfortable. She said that Earth did value peace and compassion, but those values applied to people who respected human rights and dignity. She said that the Vordani Empire had voted to enslave billions of humans and had sent a fleet to enforce that decision, which demonstrated neither respect nor compassion. She said that the Vordani were fortunate that Earth believed in proportional response because many human leaders had argued for complete military occupation. Kelrix tried to argue that the vote was just politics and that the Vordani had not meant any real harm. Lisa laughed and asked if Kelrix would feel the same way if another species voted to enslave the Vordani people and sent fleets to their system. She asked if that would be just politics or if it would be an act of war. Kelrix had no answer, and the meeting continued in uncomfortable silence while Lisa approved the closure of another 6 military installations. In the Zathron, Home System Commander Ryan Foster was dealing with a different problem. The Zathron government had accepted Earth's terms, but their scientific community was refusing to cooperate with the dismantling of their weapons research programs. Zathran scientists argued that their research had civilian applications and should not be restricted by Earth's oversight. Ryan visited the largest research facility, accompanied by 20 human Marines, and met with the head scientist whose name was difficult for humans to pronounce, so everyone called him Dr. Vex. Vex was convinced that the humans were trying to steal Zathran research and keep it for themselves under the guise of peacekeeping. Ryan explained patiently that Earth had no interest in Zathran technology because human science was decades ahead in every field that mattered. He offered to demonstrate by showing Vex the specifications for the autonomous machines that had taken apart the Zathran fleet. Vex studied the data, and gradually his skepticism changed to shock, and then to something approaching despair. He realized that the Zathrans had been working on weapons technology that Earth had mastered and moved beyond years ago. Ryan told Vex that the Zathran research facilities would be closed not because Earth feared Zathran weapons, but because weapons research had become the focus of their entire civilization at the expense of everything else. He said that the Zathrans had brilliant minds that were wasted on designing better ways to kill people. He said that Earth was offering them a chance to redirect their talents toward sciences that would actually improve lives. Vex asked what would happen. The Zathrans refused, and Ryan said simply that Earth would shut down the facilities by force and the scientists would have to find other work. The conversation continued for hours, and by the end, Vex agreed to cooperate, but only because he understood that resistance was pointless. Ryan left the facility knowing that the Zathrans would comply with Earth's terms but would resent every moment of it. He reported back to his superiors that the occupation would need to continue for at least 5 years before the Zathrans could be trusted to maintain their own reduced military without human supervision. The Galactic Council called an emergency session to address what they were now calling the human crisis, and representatives from 200 species attended either in person or via communication link. Council head Threnix opened the session by acknowledging that the Council had made a serious error in judgment regarding humanity. She carefully avoided using words like mistake or wrong decision because that would imply moral failure rather than simple miscalculation. She proposed that the Council rescind the enslavement, vote and offer Earth full membership, with voting rights and representation on all major committees. Ambassador Jack Morrison attended the session via holographic projection and listened to Threnix's proposal with obvious amusement. When she finished, he thanked her for the offer and then explained why Earth would be declining. He said that the Galactic Council had revealed its true nature when it voted unanimously to enslave an entire species without any moral consideration. He said that Earth had no interest in joining an organization that viewed sentient beings as resources to be exploited. He said that humanity would establish its own network of alliances with species that shared human values and would ignore the Council, except when necessary to prevent future atrocities. Threnix tried to argue that the Council served an important function in maintaining galactic peace and that Earth's refusal to participate would create chaos. Jack pointed out that the Council had voted to enslave Earth, which suggested their definition of peace was different from humanity's. He said that Earth would maintain peace through strength and through alliances with like-minded species. He said that any species that threatened human interests or human allies would face the same consequences as the Fordanians, Zathrans, and Krell. He said that Earth was offering the galaxy a simple choice between cooperation and conflict. The session ended with no resolution, and Jack returned to his office where Kelly was waiting with more messages from species wanting to negotiate with Earth. He noticed that several of the messages came from species that had remained neutral during the enslavement vote. These species had not voted yes, but they had also not voted no, which meant they had been willing to let humanity be enslaved without objection. Jack wondered if Earth should treat them differently from the species that actively voted for enslavement, or if passive acceptance of evil was just as bad as active participation. He decided that question could wait for another day because right now Earth needed to focus on consolidating its position and ensuring that no species would ever again consider humanity to be easy prey. The galaxy was learning a lesson that humans had learned thousands of years ago during their own violent history. The lesson was simple but apparently difficult for many species to understand. Peace was not the absence of capability for violence, but rather the choice not to use that capability against those who respected your right to exist. The message reached Earth 3 months after humanity had begun enforcing peace terms across the galaxy, and it came from a species that nobody expected to hear from. The Torvin Collective had been one of the most enthusiastic supporters of enslaving humanity, because they operated the largest labor markets in known space and saw Earth's population as potential profit. They had voted yes without hesitation, and had even offered to handle the logistics of distributing humans to various species for a reasonable commission. Now their message was brief and desperate and consisted of only 3 words, which were, "Please help us, President Elizabeth." Grant read the message in her office while her advisors stood nearby waiting for her decision. Secretary of Defense Christopher Yang pointed out that the Torvin deserved whatever trouble they were facing because they had literally tried to profit from human slavery. Director of Intelligence Nancy Cole added that helping the Torvin would send the wrong message to other species who might think Earth would forgive their actions if they asked nicely. Elizabeth listened to both arguments and then asked what exactly the Torvin needed help with. The detailed report explained that the Torvin home system was under attack by the Zelthari Empire, which was the aggressive species from the Outer Rim that had not been part of the Galactic Council. The Zelthari had apparently decided that the Council's weakness in dealing with Earth meant they could expand their territory without consequence. They had attacked 3 Torvin colonies and were now approaching the Torvin homeworld with a fleet of 400 ships. The Torvin military had been reduced to almost nothing after decades of relying on Council protection, and they had no way to defend themselves. Elizabeth asked why the Torvin were asking Earth for help instead of the Galactic Council. Nancy explained that the Council had already declined to intervene because they were dealing with the aftermath of the failed attempt to enslave humanity. Multiple Council species had reduced their military strength as part of Earth's peace terms, which meant they could not spare forces to help the Torvin. The Council had essentially told the Torvin to negotiate surrender terms with the Zelthari and hope for the best. Christopher argued that Earth should let the Torvin face the consequences of their choices and focus on protecting human interests. Nancy agreed and pointed out that humanity had limited resources and could not protect every species in the galaxy. Elizabeth sat quietly for several minutes and then asked a question that made both advisors uncomfortable. She asked what kind of species humanity wanted to be and whether Earth's values only applied when they were convenient. She pointed out that the Torvin had tried to enslave humanity, which was unforgivable, but the Zelthari were currently trying to conquer the Torvin, which was also wrong. She said that Earth had spent 3 months teaching the galaxy that actions have consequences but now had an opportunity to teach a different lesson. She said that humanity could show the galaxy that Earth's opposition to enslavement and conquest applied to everyone, not just to humans. She said that protecting the Torvan would cost resources but would establish Earth as a power that defended principles rather than just pursuing revenge. Christopher asked if she was seriously considering helping a species that had voted to enslave billions of humans. Elizabeth said yes and explained her reasoning. She said that the Torvan had voted for enslavement because they thought it was profitable and safe and supported by the entire galactic community. She said they had been wrong on all 3 counts and were now paying a price. She said that letting them be conquered by the Zelthari would not teach them to respect human rights, but would only teach them that the strong do what they want and the weak suffer. She said that Earth needed to demonstrate that there was a third option, which was a galaxy where principles mattered more than power. Nancy pointed out that the Zelthari might not care about human principles and might attack Earth's forces if they intervened. Elizabeth smiled and said that would be an excellent opportunity to teach the Zelthari the same lessons that the Vordani and Zathrans and Krell had learned. She ordered Christopher to prepare a response force and made it clear that the mission was not about protecting the Torvan but about establishing that Earth would oppose conquest and slavery regardless of who was involved. Captain Lisa Brady received orders to take her ship and 15 other vessels to the Torvan home system and prevent the Zelthari from completing their invasion. She was given strict instructions to use minimum necessary force and to prioritize protecting civilian populations over military assets. The journey took 5 days, and when the human fleet arrived, they found the Zelthari attack already in progress. Zelthari ships were bombarding Torvan cities from orbit, while Torvan defense forces tried desperately to evacuate civilians. Lisa opened a communication channel to the Zelthari fleet commander, who identified himself as war leader Krax, and informed her that this was an internal matter that did not concern humanity. Lisa explained politely that Earth had made it their business to oppose conquest and slavery throughout the galaxy. Krax laughed and said that the humans were welcome to try stopping him, but he had 400 ships and she had only 16. Lisa said that numbers were less important than technology, and gave Krax one opportunity to withdraw peacefully. Krax responded by ordering his fleet to open fire on the human ships, and Lisa gave the order that her crew had been waiting for. The human vessels activated defensive systems that created energy barriers capable of absorbing anything the Zelthari could throw at them. Then the human ships began targeting Zelthari vessels with weapons that disrupted their power systems without destroying them. Within 20 minutes, half the Zelthari fleet was drifting helplessly with no power to weapons or engines. Krax realized too late that he was facing the same military capability that had defeated the Galactic Council's attempt to enslave Earth. Lisa gave Krax a choice between withdrawing immediately or having his entire fleet disabled and his crews returned home in cargo containers. Krax chose withdrawal, and the Zelthari fleet limped back to their territory while human ships maintained escort to ensure they actually left. The Torvan government sent grateful messages to Earth and offered to provide whatever compensation humanity desired. Lisa forwarded the messages to President Grant and continued her patrol of the system until she was certain the threat had passed. Back on Earth, the response to helping the Torvan was mixed among the population. Some people argued that Elizabeth had made the right decision because Earth's values needed to be consistent. Others argued that the Torvan did not deserve protection after voting for human enslavement. Public debates filled the networks and news channels while philosophers and ethicists discussed the implications of Earth's choice. Elizabeth watched the debates with interest, but did not regret her decision because she understood that leadership sometimes meant making unpopular choices for the right reasons. The Galactic Council held another emergency session, and this time the topic was Earth's intervention in the Torvan crisis. Several species argued that humanity had overstepped by interfering in a conflict that did not involve them. Ambassador Jack Morrison attended and listened to the complaints with obvious boredom. When asked to explain Earth's actions, he said simply that humanity opposed conquest and enslavement, regardless of who was involved. He pointed out that the Council had proven unable or unwilling to protect its own members, which raised questions about the Council's purpose. Threnix tried to argue that the Council was still recovering from recent events and needed time to rebuild its military capabilities. Jack pointed out that the Council had built those military capabilities specifically to enforce decisions like enslaving Earth, which suggested they had wrong priorities. He said that Earth would continue to intervene in situations where principles that humans valued were being violated. He said that species who wanted Earth's protection could earn it by demonstrating respect for sentient rights and peaceful coexistence. The session devolved into arguments between species who thought Earth was being too aggressive and species who thought the Council had failed in its duties. Jack left before any resolution was reached because he had more important matters to attend to. Kelly had informed him that 17 species had formally requested alliances with Earth and wanted to discuss mutual defense agreements. Jack reviewed their records and noted that most of them had remained neutral during the enslavement. Vote which was better than voting yes, but not exactly admirable. He decided to meet with representatives from each species and evaluate whether they genuinely shared human values or just wanted protection from stronger neighbors. Earth needed allies, but not allies who would expect humans to fight their battles while contributing nothing themselves. The meetings would take weeks, but Jack considered it time well spent, because the future of human influence in the galaxy depended on building a network of species who believed in the same principles. Meanwhile, Commander Ryan Foster was dealing with an unexpected development in Zathran space. A group of Zathran scientists had approached him with a proposal to collaborate on medical research that could benefit both species. The scientists were led by Dr. Vex, who had initially resisted Earth's oversight, but had gradually come to respect human capabilities. Vex explained that Zathran biological knowledge combined with human technological innovation could lead to breakthroughs in treating diseases that affected multiple species. Ryan was skeptical at first because he suspected the Zathrans might be trying to gain access to human technology through cooperation. He discussed the proposal with his superiors and received permission to proceed with careful oversight. The collaboration began slowly, with both sides sharing basic research and gradually building trust. Ryan found himself surprised by how dedicated the Zathran scientists were once they stopped focusing on weapons and started working on problems that could help people. The project became a model for how former enemies could work together toward common goals, and other species began requesting similar collaborations with Earth. President Elizabeth Grant saw these developments as proof that her decision to help the Torvan had been correct. Earth was establishing itself not just as a military power, but as a force for positive change in the galaxy. The species that had voted to enslave humanity were learning that cooperation was more beneficial than conquest, and that human friendship was worth more than human servitude. The Zelthari Empire watched these developments with growing concern and war. Leader Krax reported to his superiors that humanity represented a threat to their expansion plans. The Zelthari had built their empire through military conquest and did not understand species who valued principles over power. They began planning a larger campaign that would test whether Earth could truly protect all the species that were now seeking human alliance. Krax was confident that if he brought enough ships, humanity would have to back down or face losses they could not sustain. He was wrong, but he would not discover that until it was too late. The Zelthari assembled the largest military force in their empire's history, with 2,000 ships, drawn from every sector under their control and war. Leader Krax commanded from a massive flagship that was twice the size of any vessel humanity had encountered before. He had spent 6 months planning this campaign and was confident that sheer numbers would overwhelm any defense Earth could mount. The target was not Earth itself, because Krax understood that attacking humanity's homeworld would unite every human against him. Instead, he chose to attack 5 human-allied species simultaneously, which would force Earth to divide its forces or abandon its allies and prove that human protection was worthless. The plan was sound, according to conventional military strategy, and Krax had studied every report of human capabilities that was available. He knew about the gravitational field generators and the autonomous machines and the advanced weapon systems. He believed that these technologies gave humans an advantage in small engagements, but that a truly massive assault would overwhelm their ability to respond. He was making the same mistake that the Vordani and Zathrans and Krell had made, which was assuming that human military power worked the same way as every other species in the galaxy. The Zelthari fleet split into 5 groups of 400 ships each and attacked their targets within minutes of each other. The species under attack were all recent human allies who had requested Earth's protection after seeing what happened to species that opposed humanity. They included the Myrax Republic and the Fenner Coalition, and the Delvan Commonwealth and the Saran Alliance and the Kelthran Federation. None of them had voted to enslave Earth, but they had remained neutral, which meant they had not actively opposed it either. Earth had accepted them as allies because President Elizabeth Grant believed in giving species a chance to prove their commitment to human values. The attacks began, well for the Zelthari and their ships quickly overwhelmed the limited defenses that the allied species possessed. Krax watched from his flagship as reports came in of successful bombardments and occupation of key installations. He estimated that within 48 hours all 5 species would be forced to surrender, and Earth would have to choose between military action and losing credibility with potential allies. He was feeling satisfied with his strategy when the first human response arrived. It was not a fleet of ships or a message demanding ceasefire or a diplomatic protest. It was a single small device that appeared in the bridge of every Zelthari ship across all 5 attack groups at the same moment. The devices were spheres about the size of a human fist, and they hovered in the center of each bridge, emitting a soft blue glow. Krax stared at the sphere on his own bridge and ordered his security teams to destroy it, but their weapons passed through it as if it was not physically present. Then the spheres began to speak in a voice that every species could understand through their natural hearing organs. The voice belonged to Admiral Richard Hayes, who commanded Earth's defense forces, and he explained very calmly what was about to happen. He said that every Zelthari ship was now tagged with a quantum marker, that human systems could track anywhere in the galaxy. He said that the spheres were not weapons, but rather communication devices that could not be blocked or destroyed. He said that Earth had detected the Zelthari attack within seconds of it beginning and had already deployed response forces. He said that Krax had 5 minutes to order a complete withdrawal, or the Zelthari Empire would face consequences that would make the Vordani defeat look merciful. Krax tried to respond but found that his communication systems would only allow him to contact other Zelthari vessels and not the human admiral. He ordered his fleet to ignore the threat and continue the attack because he believed Earth was bluffing. He thought the spheres were a psychological trick designed to make him retreat without a fight. His captains followed orders and continued their bombardment of the allied worlds, while Krax counted down the 5 minutes that the human had given him. When the time expired, nothing seemed to happen at first. Then Krax noticed that his ship's systems were reporting strange readings from the surrounding space. The sensor displays showed that reality itself was bending around the Zelthari fleet in ways that should not be possible. Before anyone could process what they were seeing, every single Zelthari ship across all 5 attack groups was suddenly somewhere else. They had been transported instantaneously from 5 different star systems to a single location in deep space, far from any inhabited worlds. The location was deliberately chosen to be uncomfortable, and the Zelthari crews found themselves in a region of space with intense radiation and gravitational anomalies that made navigation extremely difficult. Their ships were intact and functional, but the environment made it clear that they were at Earth's mercy. The spheres in each bridge spoke again, and Admiral Hayes explained that the Zelthari fleet had just experienced human spatial manipulation technology. He said that Earth could move ships anywhere in the galaxy without their consent, which made conventional military strategy obsolete. He said that the Zelthari had 3 choices. The first choice was to return home immediately and never threaten human allies again. The second choice was to remain in their current location for as long as Earth decided to leave them there, which could be days or weeks or months. The third choice was to continue being hostile, in which case Earth would transport every Zelthari ship to different random locations across the galaxy and leave the crews to figure out how to get home on their own. Krax asked how long he had to decide, and Hayes said he had already used up his decision time by continuing the attack. After the warning, every Zelthari ship vanished again, and this time they reappeared in 2,000 different locations scattered across known space. Some ships found themselves near inhabited systems where they could request assistance. Others appeared in regions so remote that it would take years to reach any civilization. Krax himself appeared in orbit around a dead world on the far edge of the galaxy, and spent several hours staring at his navigation displays trying to calculate a route home. His mighty invasion force had been scattered, like leaves in a storm, in the Zelthari Empire's expansion. plans had been destroyed without Earth firing a single weapon. The Galactic Council received detailed reports of what had happened, and the chamber fell into complete silence as representatives tried to process the implications. Earth had just demonstrated technology that made warfare meaningless because any fleet could be neutralized by simply moving it somewhere else. Several species began calculating whether their own territorial ambitions were worth pursuing, if humans could just relocate their ships at will. Ambassador Jack Morrison attended the session and watched the delegates realize that the galaxy had fundamentally changed. Threnix asked Jack if Earth planned to use this transportation technology to enforce its will throughout the galaxy. Jack laughed and said that Earth had no interest in conquest or empire building. He said that humans would use their capabilities to protect allies and prevent aggressive species from conquering others. He said that any species that wanted to maintain a large military for defensive purposes was welcome to do so. He said that any species that wanted to use their military to expand territory or enslave others would find their ships scattered across space. The Torvan ambassador stood and asked to address the council. She was a small female whose name was Varix, and she had been part of the government that voted to enslave humanity 6 months ago. She said that the Torvan people wanted to formally apologize to Earth for their actions, and to thank humanity for protecting them from the Zelthari, despite their past behavior. She said that the Torvan had learned that profit without principles led to disaster, and that they were committed to changing their society to align with human values. Jack listened to the speech and noted that Varix seemed sincere, but he had learned to be skeptical of species that only changed their positions when it benefited them. He told Varix that Earth would accept the apology, but that actions mattered more than words. He said that the Torvan could prove their sincerity by closing their labor markets that traded in sentient beings, and by working to establish rights for workers throughout their territory. He said that if the Torvan truly changed their practices, Earth would consider them genuine allies, rather than temporary partners of convenience. Other species began lining up to make similar speeches, and Jack listened to dozens of apologies and promises of reform. Some were clearly sincere, while others were obviously motivated by fear of human retaliation. Jack responded to each with the same basic message, which was that Earth valued genuine change over empty promises. He said that humanity would be watching how species behaved when they thought Earth was not looking. He said that the galaxy was entering a new era, where principles would matter more than power, and where cooperation would be valued over conquest. President Elizabeth Grant watched the council session from her office and felt cautiously optimistic about the future. She knew that not every species would embrace human values, and that there would be more conflicts ahead. She knew that maintaining galactic peace would require constant vigilance and occasional shows of force. But she also believed that most species were capable of change when given proper motivation and examples to follow. Earth had proven that it was possible to be both principled and powerful, and that combination was influencing how other species viewed their own choices. Secretary Christopher Yang entered her office with reports from the 5 species that the Zelthari had attacked. All of them had suffered minimal damage because human forces had arrived quickly and prevented extensive bombardment. The allied species were grateful and were sending delegations to Earth to formalize their partnership agreements. Christopher pointed out that Earth was accumulating allies faster than it could process formal treaties, and that the diplomatic corps was struggling to keep up with demand. Elizabeth said that was a good problem to have, compared to fighting multiple wars simultaneously. She asked Christopher to prioritize species that had demonstrated genuine commitment to human values over those that simply wanted protection. She said that Earth's alliance network should be built on shared principles rather than convenience. She said that humanity had spent thousands of years learning that temporary alliances based on mutual fear fell apart as soon as the fear disappeared. She wanted to build something more permanent. Captain Lisa Brady returned to Earth after spending 3 months patrolling Allied territory and ensuring that no species attempted to take advantage of the chaos following the Zelthari defeat. She reported directly to Admiral Richard Hayes and provided detailed assessments of each Allied species' military capabilities and political stability. Richard listened carefully and asked Lisa whether she thought Earth was taking on too many commitments too quickly. Lisa considered the question and said that humanity had no choice but to act because the Galactic Council had proven itself incapable of maintaining peace or protecting weaker species. She said that Earth either had to accept a leadership role or watch the galaxy descend into the same cycle of conquest and enslavement that had characterized the past 1,000 years. She said that most humans did not want an empire, but understood that influence came with responsibility. Richard agreed and said that Earth's strategy going forward would focus on building strong regional alliances rather than trying to control everything directly. He said that human forces would maintain a presence in key systems, but would rely on allied species to handle local security. He said that the goal was to create a galaxy where species felt safe enough to focus on advancement rather than military buildup. He said it was an ambitious goal, but humanity had always been good at ambitious goals. The Zelthari Empire eventually recovered its scattered fleet, but the process took 8 months and cost them enormous resources. War leader Krax was stripped of his command and exiled for his failure. The new Zelthari leadership approached Earth with a request for peace negotiations, and Ambassador Jack Morrison met with them in a neutral system. The Zelthari admitted that their expansion strategy had been based on outdated assumptions about military power. They agreed to reduce their fleet by half and to respect the territory of species under Earth's protection. The agreement was signed and became a model for how aggressive species could reform without being completely destroyed. Earth demonstrated that it preferred rehabilitation over annihilation when possible. The galaxy watched and learned that humanity's strength was matched by restraint, which made Earth's power more acceptable than the Council's had been. Species stopped viewing humans as conquerors and started seeing them as protectors. The transition was not immediate or complete, but it was real. The galaxy that had voted unanimously to enslave Earth now looked to humanity for guidance and lead.